The entire diner went silent when the little girl started screaming. Her billionaire father was seconds away from leaving in shame. That's when a broke engineer working as a waitress did something impossible. She didn't offer candy. She didn't offer toys. She built a tiny structure with salt shakers and sugar packets, whispered one word, and the child stopped crying instantly. The father froze. He stared at this woman in a stained apron, then at his daughter who smiled for the first time in 4 years. He didn't know it yet, but this stranger held a secret that would destroy his engagement, expose a decade-old betrayal, and prove that sometimes the most brilliant minds are hidden in the most unexpected places. What happened next changed all their lives forever. Stay with me, because this story will break your heart before it heals it. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about the day everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Rosie's roadside diner, the kind of place where the coffee is always hot and the dreams are always cold. But on this particular day, something extraordinary was about to happen. Her name was Sarah Bennett, and if you saw her that afternoon, you'd never guess she was once destined for greatness. At 24 years old, Sarah was serving pancakes and burgers to truckers and travelers, her hands rough from years of carrying heavy trays, her back aching from double shifts. She wore a stained apron over jeans that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had long given up trying to look neat. But here's what nobody knew. Sarah wasn't just a waitress. She was a structural design engineer, or at least she used to be. She'd graduated top of her class from one of the best engineering schools in the country. She'd designed bridge supports that could withstand earthquakes. She'd calculated load-bearing capacities that saved construction companies millions. She had a mind that could see the invisible forces holding buildings together, the tension and compression that kept the world from falling apart. But life has a way of breaking even the strongest structures. When her father got sick, when the medical bills started piling up like bricks without mortar, Sarah had to make a choice. She left her engineering career behind and took the first job she could find that paid cash daily. That job was at Rosie's Diner, and she'd been there for 3 long years. Every day, while she poured coffee and wiped down tables, her mind was still calculating. She'd look at the wobbly tables and mentally design better support systems. She'd watch the ceiling fans and calculate their rotational stress. It was the only way she kept her sanity, the only way she kept her brain from forgetting everything she'd learned. On this particular Tuesday, the lunch rush was dying down when the front door opened. And let me tell you, everyone in that diner felt it. The atmosphere changed instantly, like someone had sucked all the ordinary air out and replaced it with something electric. Walking through that door was James Wellington, and if you followed business news, you knew exactly who he was. James wasn't just rich. He was the kind of wealthy that makes other wealthy people feel poor. At 35, he built Wellington Properties, the largest real estate development company in the country. He owned skyscrapers in every major city. His company had reshaped entire skylines. And he looked every bit the part, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. But today, James Wellington didn't look like a powerful businessman. He looked like a man barely holding it together. Holding his hand, gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white, was a little girl. Her name was Sophie, and she was 6 years old. She wore an expensive dress that looked uncomfortable, her blonde hair in perfect braids, but her face was a mask of pure terror. Her eyes darted around the diner like she was trapped in a cage, and you could see her counting, her lips moving silently as she stared at everything around her. James chose a booth in Sarah's section and practically collapsed into it. Sarah approached them with her notepad, and she immediately noticed something. This wasn't a normal father-daughter lunch. This was a man at the end of his rope. "Welcome to Rosie's," Sarah said gently, keeping her voice soft. "What can I get for you today?" James barely looked up from the menu. His voice was tight, stressed. "Black coffee. Grilled cheese for her, no crusts. We're not staying long." Sarah nodded, but then she did something that waitresses aren't really supposed to do. She looked at Sophie, really looked at her. The little girl was tapping the table with her fingers. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Sarah recognized it instantly. The Fibonacci sequence. 1 1 2 3 5 8. This child wasn't just tapping randomly. She was creating mathematical patterns to calm herself down. Sophie doesn't talk, James said suddenly, his voice hard and defensive. To anyone. So don't bother trying. Sarah felt her heart squeeze. She knew that tone. It was the sound of a parent who'd been judged too many times, who'd heard too many opinions, who was exhausted from explaining. She simply nodded and walked away to place the order. But as she stood by the kitchen window waiting for the food, Sarah couldn't stop watching them. Sophie was getting more agitated. She was rocking back and forth now, her breathing getting faster. And then, without warning, the little girl let out a scream. It wasn't a tantrum scream. It was a scream of genuine distress, high-pitched and terrifying. Sophie threw her hands over her ears and began crying, her whole body shaking. James tried to comfort her, but you could see the panic in his eyes. Sophie, please not here. We talked about this. Other customers were staring now. A man at the counter muttered something about discipline. A woman shook her head disapprovingly. And Sarah felt something inside her snap, not with anger, but with understanding. She grabbed a handful of items from behind the counter. Sugar packets, salt shakers, ketchup bottles, napkin holders. Without asking permission, without hesitating, Sarah walked straight to their booth and knelt down beside it. James looked at her like she was crazy. What are you? Watch, Sarah said quietly. And then she began to build. Here's what you need to understand about structural engineering. It's not just about building big things. It's about understanding balance, about seeing how small pieces can support something much larger. It's about knowing that even the tiniest element has a purpose, a load it can carry, a role it plays in keeping everything stable. And in that moment, kneeling on the sticky diner floor, Sarah began to teach Sophie that lesson without saying a word. She took the sugar packets first, standing them upright in a careful pattern. Then she placed the salt shakers at precise intervals, creating support points. She used the ketchup bottles as columns, and slowly, methodically, she began building a small bridge structure right there on the table. Sophie's screaming started to fade. Her crying turned to hiccups. Her eyes, red and puffy, focused on what Sarah was doing. See this? Sarah said softly, pointing to the base. This is the foundation. Everything needs a strong foundation. Without it, nothing can stand. She placed another sugar packet. And this is tension. It pulls. And this, she positioned a napkin holder, is compression. It pushes. When they work together, when they balance each other perfectly, that's when something becomes strong enough to hold weight. Sophie leaned forward, her breathing slowing. She reached out one trembling finger and touched the structure. That's right, Sarah encouraged. You feel how stable it is? That's because every piece is exactly where it needs to be. Not random. Not chaotic. Perfectly balanced. Sophie's eyes met Sarah's, and for the first time since they'd walked in, the little girl smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. And then Sophie did something that made James drop his coffee cup. It clattered on the table, spilling everywhere, but nobody moved. Sophie whispered, so quietly you almost couldn't hear it. Triangle. She pointed to the triangular support Sarah had created with 3 sugar packets. Yes, Sarah's face lit up. Triangles are the strongest shape in engineering. They distribute force evenly. You're absolutely right. James was frozen, staring at his daughter like he was seeing a ghost. She hasn't spoken in public in 4 years, he breathed. Not since her mother died. Sarah looked up at him, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The knowledge that this little girl wasn't broken. She was brilliant. But before anyone could say another word, the manager, a heavy-set man named Rick, came storming over. What the hell is this mess? Rick shouted, gesturing at the structure on the table. Sarah, you're supposed to be serving customers, not playing with the condiments. And this spill. I'll clean it, Sarah said quickly, standing up. You're damn right you will. And then you're taking a pay cut for wasting time and materials. Rick turned to James. Sir, I apologize for my employee's unprofessional. Stop. James's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. He stood up. And suddenly he wasn't just a stressed father. He was James Wellington, the man who'd built an empire. This woman, James said, pointing at Sarah, just did something that dozens of the highest-paid child psychologists in the country couldn't do. She helped my daughter speak. So I suggest you show her some respect. Rick's face went red, but he backed off. James pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the table. For the meal and the mess, he said. Then he pulled out a business card, black with gold lettering. And this is for you. He handed it to Sarah. I don't know what you're doing working here, but I can tell you're wasting your life. Come work for me. I'll pay you 5 times whatever you make here. My daughter needs someone who understands her. I need someone who can see patterns where everyone else sees chaos. Sarah stared at the card. 5 times her salary. That would cover her father's treatments. That would pay off the debts. That would change everything. But she shook her head. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate it, but I can't just leave. I have responsibilities here. And I'm not a nanny. I'm an engineer. I know exactly what you are, James said, his blue eyes intense. My head of security already ran your name while you were getting our food. Sarah Bennett, graduated with honors in structural engineering, published 2 papers on seismic-resistant design before you were 22. You left Wellington Properties 3 years ago. Yes, you used to work for my company, though we never met, to care for your sick father. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable. You had no right. I'm offering you $10,000 for one afternoon, James interrupted. Just today. Watch Sophie while I take one critical meeting. If you never want to see me again after that, fine. But my nanny quit this morning. My fiancé is out of the country, and I'm desperate. Please. $10,000. Sarah thought of her father in their tiny apartment, thought of the medical bills. She looked at Sophie, who was carefully studying the little bridge structure, running her fingers along each support point. One afternoon, Sarah said. She untied her apron and dropped it on the counter. Rick started to protest, but James silenced him with a look that could freeze fire. If you fire her, James said coldly, I'll buy this diner and fire you. Choose wisely. As they walked out to a sleek black car that probably cost more than Sarah's entire apartment building, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just walking into a job. She was walking into a war. And the enemy was already waiting. James Wellington's penthouse was on the 80th floor of the Azure Tower, the crown jewel of his real estate empire. When the private elevator doors opened, Sarah stepped into a world she'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive fabrics. Everything was white, chrome, and glass. It was beautiful, Sarah supposed, but it felt cold. It looked like a showroom, not a home. There were no toys scattered on the floor, no crayon drawings on the refrigerator, no signs that a child actually lived here. Sophie's room is down that hall, James said, checking his watch nervously. Her tablets are charged. There's food in the kitchen if she gets hungry. The most important thing is keeping her calm. I'll be in my office for the next 2 hours. Don't let her hurt herself, and please keep her quiet. If she starts screaming, my conference call will be ruined. Sarah knelt down to Sophie's level. What do you want to do? Want to build something else? Sophie nodded, her eyes brightening. Good. Let's find some materials. For the next hour and a half, Sarah and Sophie built structures all over the living room. They used books as pillars, rulers as beams, tape as reinforcement. Sophie didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. Her hands spoke for her, carefully placing each element exactly where it needed to go. When Sarah explained concepts like cantilevers and load distribution, Sophie absorbed it all like a sponge. You're going to be an amazing engineer someday, Sarah said, watching Sophie balance a pencil bridge between 2 stacks of books. Sophie looked up at her with those serious eyes and whispered, Like you? Sarah's heart clenched. Yes, sweetie. Like me. But better. That's when they heard it. The elevator ding. Sarah stood up, expecting James. But the woman who stepped out of the elevator was not James. She was tall, blonde, and looked like she'd stepped off a fashion runway. She wore a red designer dress that probably cost more than a car, and her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown to something terrible. Her face was beautiful in the way that ice sculptures are beautiful, perfect, cold, and sharp enough to cut. This was Victoria Ashford, James's fiancée. And from the moment her eyes landed on Sarah, sitting on the floor in jeans and a t-shirt, Sarah knew she was in trouble. Who? Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain. Are you? Sarah stood up quickly, brushing off her knees. I'm Sarah. Mr. Wellington hired me to watch Sophie this afternoon. Hired you? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. She walked closer, circling Sarah like a predator. You look like you crawled out of a dumpster. James hired you? To be near his daughter? In my home? It's not your home, Sarah said before she could stop herself. It's his home. And hers. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. She turned her attention to Sophie, who had gone rigid, clutching one of the book towers they'd built. "Sophie, darling," Victoria said in a voice that was trying to sound sweet but came out poisonous. "Come give Mommy a hug. I brought you a present from Paris." Sophie didn't move. She pressed herself against Sarah's leg. "She's shy," Sarah said carefully. "She's had a good afternoon, maybe we should." "I don't remember asking for your opinion," Victoria snapped. She moved towards Sophie with her arms outstretched. "Sophie, come here right now." Sophie shook her head and let out a small whimper. Victoria's fake smile vanished. "This is your fault," she hissed at Sarah. "You've been filling her head with nonsense. Do you know how hard I've worked to civilize this child? She's a disaster. She screams in restaurants. She embarrasses James at every social function. I've been trying to get him to send her to a special school in Switzerland where they know how to handle children like her." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "Children like her? You mean intelligent children? Creative children? She doesn't need to be sent away. She needs understanding." "Understanding." Victoria's voice went shrill. "Look at this mess." She gestured at the structures scattered around the room. "This is chaos. This is unacceptable. I run a tight ship here, and you've come in and destroyed it in one afternoon." "It's not chaos," Sarah said firmly. "It's learning. It's growth. It's exactly what she needs." Victoria's face twisted with rage. She reached for one of the structures Sophie had been most proud of, an elaborate tower made of books and rulers. "This is garbage," Victoria said, and with one swift motion, she knocked it over. The crash was loud. Books tumbled everywhere. And Sophie screamed. It was the same terrified scream from the diner, but worse. Sophie dropped to the floor, covering her ears, her body shaking with sobs. "Sophie, stop it!" Victoria shrieked. "Stop this ridiculous behavior right now." Sarah knelt beside Sophie, trying to comfort her, but the little girl was beyond reach. The carefully balanced afternoon had collapsed as completely as the tower. The office door flew open. James came running out, his phone still in his hand, his face etched with panic. "What happened?" he demanded. Victoria immediately transformed. Her angry face melted into tears. She ran to James, burying her face in his chest. "Oh, James, thank God you're here," Victoria sobbed. "It was awful. I came home early to surprise you, and I found this woman," she pointed at Sarah, "teaching Sophie dangerous things, making messes everywhere. When I tried to clean up, she became violent. She destroyed our furniture, and when I tried to stop her, Sophie had a meltdown. James, I think she's dangerous. You need to call security." Sarah felt like she'd been punched. "That's not what happened. She's lying." "Lying?" James's voice was cold as he looked at Sarah. Victoria was crying in his arms. Sophie was screaming on the floor, and the penthouse looked like a tornado had hit it. Everything had just fallen apart. Sometimes the truth is like a hidden support beam. It's there, holding everything together, but you can't see it until you know where to look. And as Sarah stood in that destroyed penthouse, watching James comfort Victoria while Sophie sobbed on the floor, she realized she was looking at a structure built entirely on lies. "Mr. Wellington," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. "Check the angles." "Excuse me?" James looked at her with confusion and anger. "The debris," Sarah pointed to the scattered books and rulers. "If I had knocked it over violently, the pieces would have spread in a radial pattern from the point of impact. But look, they're scattered in a directional line. Someone pushed from that direction." She pointed toward where Victoria had been standing. "That's absurd," Victoria said, pulling away from James, her tears drying suspiciously fast. "She's trying to confuse you with technical jargon. James, darling, she's clearly disturbed." But Sarah wasn't done. She walked over to the mess and knelt down, her engineering mind taking over. "And look at this book here. See the way it landed? The spine is bent backward. That only happens with a downward strike, not a falling collapse. Someone deliberately destroyed this structure, and it wasn't Sophie, and it wasn't me." James was staring at the evidence, and Sarah could see the gears turning in his mind. "Also," Sarah continued, her confidence growing, "Sophie isn't screaming because of violence. She's screaming because the pattern was destroyed. Watch." Sarah began carefully picking up the books, stacking them back in order. "Sophie, remember how we built this? Can you help me fix it?" Slowly, Sophie's screams turned to whimpers. She uncovered her ears and looked at what Sarah was doing. With trembling hands, she reached for a ruler and placed it exactly where it had been before. "That's it," Sarah encouraged softly. "You remember. You built something beautiful." Victoria's mask of concern was slipping. This is ridiculous, James. Are you really going to trust some random woman over your fiancé? My fiancé who was supposed to be in Paris until Thursday, James said slowly, his eyes sharp now. Why did you come back early, Victoria? To surprise you, Victoria said quickly, but her voice had lost its conviction. Or, James said, pulling his phone from his pocket, you came back because my assistant accidentally sent you an email about hiring a new caregiver for Sophie. You wanted to see who was threatening your plan. What plan? Victoria's voice went shrill. The plan to send Sophie away. James's voice was getting harder. You've been pushing for months to send her to that boarding school in Switzerland. The one that's basically a prison for difficult children of wealthy parents. You want her gone so she won't interfere with your perfect life. She's uncontrollable. Victoria shouted, her composure finally cracking. She ruins everything. Do you know what it's like to take her anywhere? People stare. People judge. I can't build my social standing with a damaged child hanging around. The word damaged hung in the air like poison. Sarah stood up, placing herself between Victoria and Sophie. She's not damaged. She's extraordinary. And if you can't see that, you don't deserve to be anywhere near her. You don't get to talk to me like that, Victoria hissed, stepping forward. You're nothing. A waitress. A nobody. Do you know who my father is? Do you know what family I come from? I know exactly who your father is, Sarah said quietly. Preston Ashford. The real estate developer who's been trying to merge with Wellington Properties for 2 years. The man who stands to make billions if this marriage goes through. Victoria's face went white. That's right, Sarah continued. I used to work in this industry, remember? I know a business arrangement when I see one. This isn't about love. This is about money. And you're willing to throw a 6-year-old girl away to close the deal. James was looking at Victoria now with completely different eyes. Is that true? Is this engagement about my company? Of course not, Victoria said, but her voice wavered. I love you, James. And I love Sophie. I'm just trying to get her the help she needs. By destroying her confidence? By calling her damaged? By terrorizing her? James's voice was rising now. I've been blind, haven't I? I've been so focused on running my company that I didn't see what was happening in my own home. He walked over to Sophie, who was still on the floor, and knelt beside her. I'm sorry, sweetheart, he said softly. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. Sophie looked up at her father, and in a small voice said, She's mean. I know, James said, his eyes glistening. She is. And she's leaving. Right now. Victoria's expression shifted from panic to rage. You can't do this. My father will destroy you. He'll pull out of every deal. He'll sink Wellington Properties. Let him try, James said, standing up. He towered over Victoria now, and there was no warmth left in his eyes. I'll call his bluff. And if he wants a war, I'll give him one. But you? You're done here. Security will escort you out. Take only your personal belongings. Everything else stays. You'll regret this, Victoria spat. Nobody will want you. Nobody will want her. You're choosing a broken child over me. I'm choosing my daughter, James said firmly. Over everyone. Over everything. Including you. Now get out. As security escorted a screaming Victoria to the elevator, James turned to Sarah. His face was tired, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I almost made the worst mistake of my life. I almost believed her over the evidence right in front of me. Sarah nodded, her anger fading into something softer. You love your daughter. Sometimes love makes us scared. Fear makes us trust the wrong people. You saved her, James said. Twice in one day. I don't know how to repay that. You don't have to repay it, Sarah said. Just listen to her. Build with her. Let her show you how brilliant she is. James looked at her for a long moment. Stay. Not for one afternoon. Stay and help me be the father she deserves. Help me build something real here, something lasting. Please. And in that moment, Sarah realized she wasn't just being offered a job. She was being offered a chance to build something she'd lost. A purpose, a family, a future. Let me tell you something about foundations. The most important part of any structure is what you can't see. It's the deep support buried in the ground, the reinforced concrete that nobody ever photographs or admires. But without it, nothing else can stand. Love is like that too. The real kind, the lasting kind, it's built on a foundation you create together, one honest moment at a time. Over the next few months, Sarah became part of the Wellington household, but not in the way anyone expected. She wasn't a nanny. She wasn't a housekeeper. She became Sophie's teacher, her friend, and slowly, carefully, she became something more to James. Every morning, Sarah would arrive at the penthouse and transform the sterile white living room into a workshop. She brought in building materials, popsicle sticks, cardboard, glue, string. She taught Sophie about tensile strength and compression, about how bridges could span impossible distances, about how the right structure could hold up entire worlds. And Sophie bloomed. Within 3 months, she was speaking in full sentences. Within 6, she was laughing regularly. She started a journal where she drew elaborate bridge designs, each one more complex than the last. She wasn't broken. She had never been broken. She'd just been waiting for someone who spoke her language. James watched this transformation with wonder. He started joining their building sessions, asking questions, learning alongside his daughter. The powerful CEO who could command boardrooms and close billion-dollar deals sat on the floor with popsicle sticks, listening to Sarah explain load distribution. And somewhere in those moments, something shifted between James and Sarah. It started small. A hand steadying hers when she reached for a tool. Eyes meeting over Sophie's head when the little girl said something brilliant. Conversations that started about engineering and ended about life, dreams, fears. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, James found Sarah on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts?" he said, joining her. Sarah smiled. "I was just thinking about my father. He called today. His treatments are working. His doctors say he might be able to go back to teaching next semester." "That's wonderful," James said warmly. "You must be relieved." "I am. But I'm also scared." "Of what?" Sarah turned to face him. "That this will end. That once my father is better, once Sophie is more stable, you won't need me anymore. And I'll have to go back to the real world." James looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah, I stopped needing you after the first week. But I started wanting you to stay after the first day. There's a difference." "Mr. Wellington." "James," he corrected softly. "When it's just us, it's James." "James," Sarah said, testing his name on her tongue. "I'm not from your world. I serve pancakes. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I don't belong." "You built a bridge," James interrupted, stepping closer. "Not just for Sophie, but for me too. You showed me how to be a father again. You showed me what matters. And you did it with sugar packets and popsicle sticks and a heart bigger than any fortune I could ever build. So don't tell me you don't belong. You're the strongest structure in my life." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like he was asking a question. Sarah answered by kissing him back, and in that moment, all the broken pieces of both their lives started fitting together into something new. But love alone doesn't build a future. Action does. The next day, James made a decision. He called Sarah into his office, where Sophie was already waiting, playing with a model bridge they'd built together. "I have something for both of you," James said, pulling out a folder. "Sarah, I want to offer you a position. Head of Community Design for Wellington Properties. I want you to design structures that matter, bridges that connect underserved communities, buildings that prioritize people over profit. You'll have a full team, unlimited budget, and complete creative control." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "James, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Sophie piped up from the floor. "Say yes so you never leave." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." "Good," James said, his professional mask slipping into pure joy. "Because there's one more thing." He pulled out a small velvet box and knelt down. Not in front of Sarah, but in front of Sophie first. "Sophie," he said seriously, "I want to ask Sarah to be part of our family forever. But I need to know if that's okay with you. You're the most important person in my world, and I won't do this without your blessing." Sophie looked at her father, then at Sarah. Her face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. "Will you teach me engineering forever?" Sarah knelt down beside her. "Every single day." "Then yes," Sophie said firmly. "Ask her, Daddy." James turned to Sarah, still on his knee, and opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and perfect. "Sarah Bennett," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking you to help me build a new one. One where brilliance matters more than wealth, where understanding matters more than status, where love is the strongest foundation of all. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at this man who had learned to see differently, at this child who had taught her that broken was just another word for beautiful, and she saw the future they could build together. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. 6 months later, they stood together at the grand opening of the Grace Memorial Bridge, a pedestrian bridge that Sarah had designed to connect two neighborhoods divided by a highway. It was her first major project for Wellington Properties, and it was breathtaking. A structure of steel and glass that looked like it was floating, held up by supports arranged in perfect mathematical harmony. Sophie cut the ribbon, her small hands sure and steady. And as they walked across the bridge together, James, Sarah, and Sophie, now a family, Sarah realized something. She'd spent years thinking she'd lost her purpose when she left engineering. But she'd been wrong. She hadn't lost it. She'd just been waiting to find what she was really meant to build. Not just bridges over water, but bridges between hearts. Sometimes the strongest structures aren't made of steel and concrete. They're made of patience, understanding, and love. And when you build them right, they last forever. The waitress saw a child struggling, and what followed stunned everyone. She found the mathematical precision of connection, proving that sometimes the only equation that matters is the one that balances the heart with the mind, the broken with the beautiful, and the struggling with the strong. That's the power of seeing what others miss. That's the magic of building something real. And that's the end of our story. I hope it touched your heart the way it touched mine.